Chapter 14. I turned on the light in the therapy room and shut the door. When I turned around, Alicia had already sat down, but not in her chair. She was in my chair. Normally, I would have explored the meaning of this telling gesture with her. Now, however, I said nothing. If sitting in my chair signified she had the upper hand, well, she did. I was impatient to get to the end of her story, not that we were so close to it. So I just sat down and waited for her to speak. She half shut her eyes and was perfectly still. Eventually, she said, I was tied to the chair, and every time I squirmed, the wire cut deeper into my legs, and they were bleeding. It was a relief to focus on the cutting instead of my thoughts. My thoughts were too scary. I thought I would never see Gabriel again. I thought I was going to die. What happened next? We sat there for what seemed like forever. It's funny. I've always thought of fear as a cold sensation, but it's not. It burns like fire. It was so hot in that room, with the windows closed and the blinds drawn, still stifling heavy air. Beads of sweat were dripping down my forehead and into my eyes, stinging them. I could smell the alcohol on him and the stink of his sweat while he drank and talked. He kept talking. I didn't listen to a lot of it. I could hear a big fat fly buzzing between the blind and the window. It was trapped and dumping against the glass. Thud, thud, thud. He asked questions about me and Gabriel, how we met, how long we'd been together, if we were happy. I thought if I could keep him talking, I had a better chance of staying alive. So I answered his questions about me, Gabriel, my work. I'd talk about whatever he wanted, just to buy time. I kept focusing on the clock, listening to it tick, and then suddenly it was 10 o'clock, and then 10:30. And still Gabriel hadn't come home. He's late, he said. Maybe he's not coming. He's coming, I said. Well, it's a good thing I'm here to keep you company. And then the clock struck 11 and I heard a car outside. The man went to the window and looked out. Perfect timing, he said. What happened next, Alicia said, happened fast. The man grabbed Alicia and swung her chair around so she faced away from the door. He said he would shoot Gabriel in the head if she spoke one word or made a single sound. Then he disappeared. A moment later, the lights fused and everything went dark. In the hallway, the front door opened and closed. Alicia? Gabriel called out. There was no reply, and he called her name again. He walked into the living room and saw her by the fireplace, sitting with her back to him. Why are you sitting in the dark? Gabriel asked. No reply. Alicia? Alicia fought to remain silent. She wanted to cry out, but her eyes had become accustomed to the dark and she could see in front of her. In the corner of the room, the man's gun glinted in the shadows. He was pointing it at Gabriel. Alicia kept silent for his sake. Alicia? Gabriel trailed her. What's wrong? Just as Gabriel reached out his hand to touch her, the man leaped from the darkness. Alicia screamed, but it was too late, and Gabriel was knocked to the floor, the man on top of him. The gun was raised like a hammer and brought down onto Gabriel's head with a sickening thud. Once, twice, 3 times, and he lay there, unconscious, bleeding. The man pulled him up and sat Gabriel on a chair. He tied him to it, using the wire. Gabriel stirred as he regained consciousness. What the fuck? What? The man raised the gun and aimed it at Gabriel. There was a gunshot, and another, and another. Alicia started screaming. The man kept firing. He shot Gabriel in the head 6 times. Then he tossed the gun to the floor. He left without saying a word. Chapter 15. So there you have it. Alicia Berenson didn't kill her husband. A faceless intruder broke into their home and in an apparently motiveless act of malice, shot Gabriel dead before vanishing into the night. Alicia was entirely innocent. That's if you believe her explanation. I didn't, not a word of it. Apart from her obvious inconsistency and inaccuracy, such as that Gabriel was not shot 6 times but only 5, one of the bullets being fired at the ceiling, nor was Alicia discovered tied to a chair, but standing in the middle of the room, having slashed her wrist. Alicia made no mention to me of the man untying her, nor did she explain why she hadn't told the police this version of events from the start. No, I knew she was lying. I was annoyed that she had lied, badly and pointlessly, to my face. For a second, I wondered if she was teasing me, seeing whether I accepted the story. If so, I was determined to give nothing away. I sat there in silence. Unusually, Alicia spoke first. I'm tired. I want to stop. I nodded and I couldn't object. Let's carry on tomorrow, she said. Is there more to say? Yes, one last thing. Very well, tomorrow. Yuri was waiting in the corridor. He escorted Alicia to her room, and I went up to my office. As I have said, it's been my practice for years to transcribe a session as soon as it's ended. The ability to accurately record what has been said during the past 50 minutes is of paramount importance to a therapist. Otherwise, much detail is forgotten and the immediacy of the emotion is lost. I sat at my desk and wrote down, as fast as I could, everything that had transpired between us. The moment I finished, I marched through the corridors, clenching my pages of notes. I knocked on Diomedes' door. There was no response, so I knocked again. Still no response, still no answer. I opened the door a crack, and there was Diomedes, fast asleep on his narrow couch. Professor? And again louder. Professor Diomedes? He spoke with a start and sat up quickly. He blinked at me. What is it? What's wrong? I need to talk to you. Should I come back later? Diomedes frowned and shook his head. I was having a brief siesta, always do, after lunch. It helps me get through the afternoon. It becomes a necessity as you get older. He yawned and stood up. Come in, Theo. Sit down. By the looks of you, it's important. I think it is, yes. Alicia? I nodded. I sat in front of the desk. He sat down behind it. His hair was sticking up to one side and he still looked half asleep. Are you sure I shouldn't come back later? Diomedes shook his head. He poured himself a glass of water from a jug. I'm awake now. Go on. What is it? I've been with Alicia, talking. I need some supervision. Diomedes nodded, and he was looking more awake by the second, and more interested. Go on. I started reading from my notes. I took him through the entire session. I repeated her words as accurately as I could and relayed the story she had told me. How the man who'd been spying on her broke into the house, took her prisoner, and shot and killed Gabriel. When I finished, there was a long pause. Diomedes' expression gave little away. He pulled a box of cigars out of his desk drawer. He took out a little silver guillotine. He popped the end of a cigar into it and sliced it off. Let's start with the counter-transference. Tell me about your emotional experience. Start at the beginning. As she was telling you her story, what kind of feelings were coming up? I thought about it for a moment. I felt excited, I suppose, and anxious, afraid. Afraid? Was it your fear or hers? Both, I imagine. And what were you afraid of? I'm not sure. Fear of failure? Perhaps? I have a lot riding on this, as you know. Diomedes nodded. What else? Frustration, too. I feel frustrated quite frequently during our sessions. And angry? Yes, I suppose so. You feel like a frustrated father dealing with a difficult child? Yes, I want to help her, but I don't know if she wants to be helped. He nodded. Stay with the feeling of anger. Talk more about it. How does it manifest itself? I hesitated. Well, I often leave the sessions with a splitting headache. Diomedes nodded. Yes, exactly. It has come out one way or another. A trainee who is not anxious will be sick. Who was it who said that? I don't know, I shrugged. I'm sick and anxious. Diomedes smiled. You're also no longer a trainee, although those feelings never go away entirely. He picked up his cigar. Let's go outside for a smoke. We went onto the fire escape. Diomedes puffed out his cigar for a moment, mulling things over. Eventually, he reached a conclusion. She's lying, you know. You mean about the man killing Gabriel? I thought so too. Not just that. Then what? All of it. The whole cock and bull story. I don't believe a single word of it. I must have looked rather taken aback. I had suspected he'll disbelieve some elements of Alicia's tale. I hadn't expected him to reject the whole thing. You don't believe in the man? No, I don't. I don't believe he ever existed. It's a fantasy, from start to finish. What makes you so sure? Diomedes gave me a strange smile. Call it my intuition. Years of professional experience with fantasists. I tried to interrupt, but he forestalled me with a wave of his hand. Of course, I don't expect you to agree, Theo. You're in deep with Alicia, and your feelings are bound up with hers like a tangled ball of wool. That is the purpose of a supervisor like this, to help you unpack the strands of wool, to see what is yours and what is hers. And once you gain some distance and clarity, I suspect you will feel rather differently about your experience with Alicia Berenson. I'm not sure what you mean. Well, to be blunt, I fear she had been performing for you, manipulating you, and it's a performance that I believe has been tailored specifically to appeal to your chivalric and, let's say, romantic instincts. It was obvious to me from the start that you intended to rescue her. I'm quite sure it was obvious to Alicia, too, hence her seduction of you. You sound like Christian. She hadn't seduced me. I am perfectly capable of withstanding a patient's sexual projections. Don't underestimate me, Professor. Don't underestimate her. She's giving an excellent performance. Diomedes shook his head and peered up at the gray clouds. The vulnerable woman under attack, alone, in need of protection. Alicia has cast herself as the victim and this mysterious man as the villain, whereas in fact Alicia and the man are one and the same. She killed Gabriel. She was guilty and she is still refusing to accept that guilt. So she splits, dissociates, fantasizes. Alicia becomes the innocent victim and you are her protector. And by colluding with this fantasy, you are allowing her to disown all responsibility. I don't agree with that. I don't believe she is lying, consciously anyway, at the very least. Alicia believes her story to be true. Yes, she believes it. Alicia is under attack, but from her own psyche, not the outside world. I knew that wasn't true, but there was no point in arguing further. I stubbed out my cigarette. How do you think I should proceed? You must force her to confront the truth. Only then will she have a hope of recovery. You must refuse point blank to accept her story. Challenge her. Demand she tells you the truth. And do you think she will? He shrugged. That, he took a long drag on his cigar, is anyone's guess. Very well, I'll talk to her tomorrow. I'll confront her. Diomedes looked slightly uneasy and opened his mouth as if he was about to say something further, but he changed his mind. He nodded and stamped out his cigar with an air of finality. Tomorrow. Chapter 16. After work, I followed Kathy to the park again. Sure enough, her lover was waiting at the same spot where they met last time. They kissed and groped each other like teenagers. Kathy glanced in my direction, and for a second I thought she saw me, but no, she only had eyes for him. I tried to get a better look at him this time, but I still didn't see his face properly. Thought something about his build was familiar. I had the feeling I'd seen him before somewhere. They walked toward Camden and disappeared into the Rose and Crown, a seedy-looking place. I waited in the cafe opposite. About an hour later, they came out. Kathy was all over him, kissing him. They kissed for a while by the road. I watched, feeling sick to my stomach, burning with hate. She eventually said goodbye to him and they left each other. She started walking away. The man turned and walked in the opposite direction. I didn't follow Kathy. I followed him. He waited at a bus stop. I stood behind him. I looked at his back, his shoulders. I imagined lunging at him, shoving him under the oncoming bus. But I didn't push him. He got on the bus. So did I. I assumed he would go directly home, but he didn't. He changed buses a couple of times. I followed him from a distance. He went to the East End, where he disappeared into a warehouse for half an hour, then another journey on another bus. He made a couple of phone calls, speaking in a low voice and chuckling frequently. I wondered if he was talking to Kathy. I was feeling increasingly frustrated and disheartened, but I was also stubborn and refused to give up. Eventually, he made his way home, getting off the bus and turning into a quiet tree-lined street. He was still talking on his phone. I followed him, keeping my distance. The street was deserted. If he had turned around, he would have seen me, but he didn't. I passed a house with a rock garden and succulent plants. I acted without thinking. My body seemed to move on its own. My arm reached over the low wall into the garden and picked up a rock. I could feel its weight in my hands. My hands knew what to do. They had decided to kill him. Crack opened the worthless scumbag's skull. I went along with this in a mindless trance, creeping after him, silently gaining ground, getting nearer. Soon I was close enough. I raised the rock, preparing to smash it down him with all my strength. I knocked him to the ground and bashed his brains out. I was so close. If he weren't still talking on his phone, he'll have heard me. Now, I raised the rock and right behind me, on my left, a front door opened. A sudden buzz of conversation, loud thank yous and goodbyes as people left the house. I froze. Right in front of me, Kathy's lover stopped and looked in the direction of the noise at the house. I stepped aside and I hid behind a tree. He didn't see me. He started walking again, but I didn't follow. The interruption had started me out of my reverie. The rock fell from my hand and it thumped to the ground. I watched him from behind the tree. He strolled up to the front door of the house, unlocked it, and let himself inside. A few seconds later, a light went on in the kitchen. He was standing in profile, a little way from the window. Only half of the room was visible from the street. He was talking to someone I couldn't see. While they talked, he opened up a bottle of wine. They sat down and ate a meal together. Then I caught a glimpse of his companion. It was a woman. Was it his wife? I couldn't see her clearly. He put his arm around her and kissed her, so I wasn't the only one being portrayed. He had returned home after kissing my wife and ate the meal this woman had prepared for him, as if nothing had happened. I knew I couldn't leave it here. I had to do something. But what? Despite my best homicidal fantasies, I wasn't a murderer. I couldn't kill him. I'll have to think of something cleverer than that. Chapter 17. I planned to have it out with Alicia first thing in the morning. I intended to make her admit she lied to me about the man killing Gabriel and force her to confront the truth. Unfortunately, I never got the chance. Yuri was waiting for me in the reception. Theo, I need to talk to you. What is it? I took a closer look at him. His face seemed to have aged overnight. He looked shrunken, pale, bloodless. Something bad had happened. There's been an accident. Alicia, she took an overdose. What? Is she... Yuri shook his head. She's still alive, but... Thank God. But she's in a coma. It doesn't look good. Where is she? Yuri took me through a series of locked corridors into the intensive care ward. Alicia was in a private room. She was hooked up to an ECG machine and a ventilator. Her eyes were closed. Christian was there with another doctor. He looked ashen in contrast to the emergency room doctor who had a deep suntan. She's obviously just gotten back from a holiday, but she didn't look refreshed. She looked exhausted. How is Alicia? I said. The doctor shook her head. Not good. We had to induce coma. Her respiratory system failed. What did she take? An opioid of some kind. Hydrocodone. Probably. Yuri nodded. There was an empty bottle of pills on the desk in her room. Who found her? I did, Yuri said. She was on the floor by the bed. She didn't seem to be breathing. I thought she was dead at first. Any idea how she got hold of the pills? Yuri glanced at Christian, who shrugged. We all know there's a lot of dealing going on in the wards. Elif is dealing, I said. Christian nodded. Yes, I think so too. Dora came in. She looked close to tears. She stood by Alicia's side and watched her for a moment. This is going to have a terrible effect on the others. It always sets the patients back months when this sort of thing happens. She sat down, reached for Alicia's hand, and stroked it. I watched the ventilator rise and fall. There was silence for a moment. I blame myself, I said. And Dora shook her head. It's not your fault, Theo. I should have taken better care of her. You did your best. You helped her, which is more than anyone else did. Has anybody told Michaelides? Christian shook his head. We're not been able to get hold of him yet. Did you try his mobile and his home phone? I tried a few times. Yuri frowned, but I saw Professor Diomedes earlier. He was here. He was? Yes, I saw him early this morning. He was at the other end of the corridor and he seemed in a rush. At least, I think it was him. That's odd. Well, he must have gone home. Try him again, will you? Yuri nodded. He looked far away somehow. Dazed, lost. He seemed to have taken it badly. I felt sorry for him. Christian's pager went off, startling him. He quickly left the room, followed by Yuri and the doctor. Dora hesitated and spoke in a low voice. Would you like a moment alone with Alicia? I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Dora stood up and squeezed my shoulder for a second. Then she walked out. Alicia and I were alone. I sat down by the bed. I reached out and took Alicia's arm. A catheter was attached to the back of her hand. I gently held her hand, stroking her palm and the inside of her wrist. I stroked her wrist with my finger, feeling the veins under her skin and the rise thickening scars from her suicide attempts. So this was it. This was how it was going to end. Alicia was silent again, and this time her silence would last forever. I wondered what Diomedes would say. I could imagine what Christian would tell him. Christian would find a way to blame me somehow. The emotions I stirred up in therapy were too much for Alicia to contain. She got a hold of the hydrocodone as an attempt to self-soothe and self-medicate. The overdose might have been accidental. I could hear Diomedes saying, but the behavior was suicidal, and that would be that. But that was not that. Something had been overlooked. Something significant. Something no one had noticed, not even Yuri. When he found Alicia unconsciously by the bed, an empty pill bottle was on her desk, yes, and a couple of pills were on the floor. So of course it was assumed she had taken an overdose. But here, under my fingertips, on the inside of Alicia's wrist, was some bruising and a little mark that told a very different story. a pinprick along the vein, a tiny hole left by a hypodermic needle, revealing the truth. Alicia didn't swallow a bottle of pills in a suicidal gesture. She was injected with a massive dose of morphine. This wasn't an overdose, it was an attempted murder. Chapter 18. Diomedes turned up half an hour later. He had been in a meeting with the trust. He said then got stuck on the underground, delayed by a signal failure. He asked Yuri to send for me. Yuri found me in my office. Professor Diomedes is here. He's with Stephanie. They're waiting for you. Thanks. I'll be right there. I made my way to Diomedes' office, expecting the worst. A scapegoat would have needed to take the blame. I've seen it before at Broadmoor. Cases of suicide, whichever member of staff was closest to the victim was held accountable, be it therapist, doctor, or nurse. No doubt Stephanie was baying for my blood. I knocked on the door and went inside. Stephanie and Diomedes were standing on either side of the desk. Judging by the tense silence, I interrupted a disagreement. Diomedes spoke first. He was clearly agitated, and his hand flew all over the place. Terrible business. Terrible. Obviously, it couldn't have come at a worse time. It gives the trust the perfect excuse to shut us down. I hardly think the trust is the immediate concern, Stephanie said. The safety of the patients come first. We need to find out exactly what happened. She turned to me. There mentioned you suspect that Elov is dealing drugs, and that's how Alicia got hold of the hydrocodone? I hesitated. Well, I've no proof. It's something I've heard a couple of the nurses talking about. But actually, there's something else I think you should know. Stephanie interrupted me with a shake of her head. We know what happened. It wasn't Elov. No? Christian happened to be passing the nurse's station, and he saw the drug cabinet was left wide open. There was no one in the station. Yuri had left it unlocked. Anyone could have gone in and helped themselves, and Christian saw Alicia lurking around the corner. He wondered what she was doing there at the time. Now, of course, it makes sense. How unfortunate Christian was there to see all this. My voice had a sarcastic tone, but Stephanie chose not to pick up on it. Christian isn't the only person who noticed Yuri's carelessness. I've often felt Yuri is far too relaxed about security, too friendly with the patients, too concerned with being popular. I'm surprised something like this didn't happen sooner. I see. I did see. I understood now why Stephanie was being cordial to me. It seemed I was off the hook. She had chosen Yuri as the scapegoat. Yuri always seems so meticulous, I said, glancing at Diomedes, wondering if he intervened. I really don't think Diomedes shrugged. My personal opinion is Alicia had always been highly suicidal. As we know, when someone wants to die, despite your best efforts to protect them, it's often impossible to prevent it. Isn't that our job? Stephanie snapped. To prevent it? No, Diomedes shook his head. Our job is to help them heal, but we are not God. We do not have the power over life and death. Alicia Bernstein wanted to die. At some point, she was bound to succeed, or at least partly succeed. I hesitated. It was now or never. I'm not so sure that's true, he said. I don't think it was a suicide attempt. You think it was an accident? No, I don't think it was an accident. Diomedes gave me a curious look. What are you trying to say, Theo? What other alternative is there? Well, to start with, I don't think Yuri gave Alicia the drugs. You mean Christian is mistaken? No, I said. Christian is lying. Diomedes and Stephanie stared at me, shocked. I went on before they could recover their power of speech. I quickly told them everything that I had read in Alicia's diary, that Christian had been treating Alicia privately before Gabriel's murder, that she was one of the several private patients he saw unofficially, and not only had he not come forward to testify at the trial, he had pretended not to know Alicia when she was admitted to the Grove. No wonder he was so against any attempt to get her talking again, I said. If she did speak, she would be in a position to expose him. Stephanie stared at me blankly. But what are you saying? You can't seriously be suggesting that he... Yes, I am suggesting it. It wasn't an overdose. It was an attempt to murder her. Where is Alicia's diary? Diomedes asked me. You have it in your possession? I shook my head. No, not anymore. I gave it back to Alicia. It must be in her room. Then we must retrieve it. Diomedes turned to Stephanie. But first, I think we should call the police, don't you? Chapter 19. From then on, things moved fast. Police officers swarmed all over the Grove, asking questions, taking photographs, sealing off Alicia's studio and her room. The investigation was led by Chef Inspector Stephen Allen, heavy-set, bald, with large reading glasses that distorted his eyes, magnifying them, making them seem bigger than life, bulging with interest and curiosity. Allen listened with careful interest to my story. I told him everything I had said to Diomedes, and I showed him my supervision notes. "Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Faber. Call me Theo. I'd like you to make an official statement, please. I'll be talking to you more in due course." "Yes, certainly." Inspector Allen had Commander Diomedes' office. He showed me out. After I made my statement to a junior officer, I hung around in the corridor, waiting. Soon enough, Christian was led to the door by a police officer. He looked uneasy, scared, and guilty. I felt satisfied he would soon be charged. There was nothing else to do except wait. On my way out of the grove, I passed the goldfish bowl. I glanced inside, and what I saw stopped me in my tracks. Elif was being slipped some drugs by Yuri, and he was pocketing some cash. Elif charged out and fixed me with her one eye, a look of contempt and hatred. "Elif," I said, "fuck off." She marched off, disappearing around the room. Yuri emerged from the goldfish bowl. As soon as he saw me, his jaw dropped. He stuttered with surprise. I didn't see you there." "Obviously not." "Elif forgot her medication. I was just giving it to her." "I see." So Yuri was dealing and supplying Elif. I wonder what else he was up to. Perhaps I have been a little too hasty to defend him so determinedly to Stephanie. I better keep an eye on him. "I wanted to ask you," he said, leading me away from the goldfish. "What should we do about Mr. Martin?" "What do you mean?" I looked at him, surprised. "You mean Jean Felix Martin? What about him?" "Well, he's been here for hours. He came this morning to visit Alicia, and he's been waiting since then." "What? Why didn't you tell me? You mean he's been here all this time?" "Sorry, it slipped my mind with everything that happened. He's in the waiting room." "I see. Well, I better go and talk to him." I hurried downstairs to reception, thinking about what I just heard. What was Jean Felix doing here? I wondered what he wanted, what it meant. I went into the waiting room and looked around, but no one was there. Chapter 20. I left the grove and lit a cigarette. I heard a man's voice calling my name. I looked up, expecting it to be Jean Felix, but it wasn't him. It was Max Bernison. He was getting out of the car and charging toward me. "What the fuck?" he shouted. "What happened?" Max's face was bright red, contorted with anger. "They just called me and told me about Alicia. What happened to her?" I took a step backward. "I think you need to calm down, Mr. Bernison." "Calm down? My sister-in-law is lying there in a fucking coma because of your negligence." Max's hand was clenched in a fist. He raised it. I thought he was going to throw a punch at me, but he was interrupted by Tanya. She hurried over, looking just as angry as he was, but angry with Max, not me. "Stop it, Max! For Christ's sake, aren't things bad enough? It's not Theo's fault." Max ignored her and turned back to me. His eyes were wide. "Alicia was in your care," he shouted. "How did you let it happen? How?" Max's eyes filled with angry tears. He was making no attempt to disguise his emotions. He stood there crying. I glanced at Tanya. She obviously knew what about his feelings for Alicia. Tanya looked dismayed and drained. Without another word, she turned and went back to their car. I wanted to get away from Max as fast as possible. I kept walking. He kept shouting abuse. I thought he was going to follow, but he didn't. He was rooted to the spot, a broken man calling after me, yelling piteously. "I hold you responsible. My poor Alicia, my girl, my poor Alicia. You'll pay for this, you hear me?" Max kept on shouting, but I ignored him. Soon his voice faded into silence. I was alone. I kept walking. Chapter 21. I walked back to the house where Kathy's lover lived. I stood there for an hour, watching. Eventually, the door opened and he emerged. I watched him leave. Where was he going? To meet Kathy? I hesitated, but decided not to follow him. Instead, I stayed watching the house. I watched his wife through the windows. As I watched, I felt increasingly sure I had to do something to help her. She was me, and I was her. We were two innocent victims, deceived and betrayed. She believed this man loved her, but he didn't. Perhaps I was wrong, assuming she knew nothing about the affair. Perhaps she did know. Perhaps they enjoyed a sexually open relationship and she was equally promiscuous. But somehow I didn't think so. She looked innocent, as I had once looked. It was my duty to enlighten her. I could reveal the truth about the man she was living with, whose bed she shared. I had no choice. I had to help her. Over the next few days, I kept returning. One day, she left the house and went for a walk. I followed her, keeping my distance. I was worried she saw me at one point, but even if she did, I was just a stranger to her for the moment. I went away and made a couple of purchases. I came back again. I stood across the road, watching the house. I saw her again, standing by the window. I didn't have a plan as such, just a vague, unformed idea of what I needed to accomplish. Rather than an inexperienced artist, I knew the result I wanted. Without knowing quite how to achieve it, I waited a while, then walked up to the house. I tried the gate. It was unlocked. It swung open and I stepped into the garden. I felt a sudden rush of adrenaline, an excellent thrill at being an intruder on someone else's property. Then I saw the back door opening. I looked for somewhere to hide. I noticed the little summer house across the grass. I raced silently across the lawn and slipped inside. I stood there for a second, catching my breath. My heart was pounding. Had she seen me? I heard her footsteps approaching. Too late to back out now. I reached into my back pocket and took out the black balaclava I bought. I pulled it over my head. I put on a pair of gloves. She walked in. She was on the phone. "Okay, darling, I'll see you at 8. Yes, I love you, too." She ended the call and switched on an electric fan. She stood in front of the fan, her hair blowing in the breeze. She picked up a pink brush and approached a canvas on an easel. She stood with her back to me. Then she caught sight of my reflection to the window. I think she saw my knife first. She stiffened and slowly turned around. Her eyes were wide with fear. We stared at each other in silence. This was the first time I came face to face with Alicia Berenson. The rest, as they say, is history. Part 5. If I justify myself, mine own mouth shall condemn me. Job 920. Chapter 1. Alicia Berenson's Diary, February 23. Theo just left. I am alone. I'm writing this as fast as I can. I haven't got much time. I got to get this down while I still have strength. I thought I was crazy at first. It was easier to think I was crazy than believe it was true. But I'm not crazy. I'm not. That first time I met him in the therapy room, I wasn't sure. There was something familiar about him, but different. I recognized his eyes, not just the color but the shape, and the same smell of cigarette and smoky aftershave, and the way he formed his words and the rhythm of his speech, but not the tone of his voice. It seemed different somehow. So, I wasn't sure. But the next time we met, he gave himself away. He said the same words, the exact same phrase he used at the house, burned into my memory. I want to help you. I want to help you see clearly. As soon as I heard that, something in my brain clicked and the jigsaw came together. The picture was complete. It was him, and something in me took over, some kind of wild animal instinct. I wanted to kill him, kill or be killed. I leaped on him and tried to strangle him and squash his eyes out, bash his skull to pieces on the floor, but I didn't succeed in killing him, and they held me down, drugged me, and locked me up. And then, after that, I lost my nerve. I started to doubt myself again. Maybe I made a mistake. Maybe I was imagining it. Maybe it wasn't him. How could it possibly be Theo? What purpose could he have in coming here to talk me like this? And then I understood all that bullshit about wanting to help me. That was the sickest part of it. He was getting a kick out of it. He was getting off on it. That's why he was here. He had come back to gloat. I want to help you. I want to help you see clearly. Well, now I saw clearly. I wanted him to know that I knew. So I lied about the way Gabriel died. As I was talking, I could see he knew I was lying. We looked at each other and he saw it, that I had recognized him. And there was something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Fear. He was afraid of me, of what I might say. He was scared of the sound of my voice. That's why he came back a few minutes ago. He didn't say anything this time. No words. He grabbed my wrist and struck a needle in my vein. I didn't struggle. I didn't fight back. I let him do it. I deserve it. I deserve this punishment. I am guilty, but so is he. That's why I'm writing this, so he won't get away with it, so he will be punished. I've got to be quick. I can feel it now. The stuff he injected me with is working. I'm so drowsy. I want to lie down. I want to sleep, but no, not yet. I got to stay awake. I got to finish the story, and this time I'll tell the truth. That night, Theo broke into the house and tied me up, and when Gabriel came home, Theo knocked him out. At first I thought he had killed him, but then I saw Gabriel was breathing. Theo pulled him up and tied him to the chair. He moved it, so Gabriel and I were sitting back to back, and I couldn't see his face. "Please," I said, "please don't hurt him. I'm begging you. I'll do anything you want." Theo laughed. I've come to hate his laugh so much. It was cold, empty, heartless. "Hurt him?" He shook his head. "I'm going to kill him." He meant it. I felt such terror. I lost control of my tears. I wept and pleaded. "I'll do anything you want, anything. Please, please let him live. He deserves to live. He's the kindest and the best of men, and I love him. I love him so much. Tell me, Alicia, tell me about your love to him. Tell me, do you think he loves you?" "He loves me," I said. I heard the clock ticking in the background. There seems to be an age before he replied. "We'll see," he said. His black eyes stared at me for a second, and I felt consumed by darkness. It was in the presence of a creature that wasn't even human. He was evil. He walked around the chair and faced Gabriel. I turned my head as far as I could, but I couldn't see them. There was a horrible dull thud. I flinched as I heard him struck Gabriel across the face. He hit him again and again until Gabriel started spluttering and woke up. "Hello, Gabriel," he said. "Who the fuck are you?" I'm a married man, so I know what it's like to love someone, and I know what it's like to be let down. What the fuck are you talking about? Only cowards betray the people who loved them. Are you a coward, Gabriel? Fuck you. I was going to kill you, but Alicia pleaded for your life. So instead, I'm going to give you a choice. Either you die, or Alicia does. You decide. The way he spoke was so cool and calm and in control. No emotion. Gabriel didn't reply for a second. He sounded out of breath, like he's been punched. No, yes. Alicia dies or you die. Your choice, Gabriel. Let's find out how much you love her. Would you die for her? You have 10 seconds to decide. 10, 9. Don't believe him, I said. He's going to kill us both. I love you. 8, 7. I know you love me, Gabriel. 6, 5. You love me. 4, 3. Gabriel, say you love me. 2. And then Gabriel spoke. I didn't recognize his voice at first. Such a tiny voice, so far away, a little boy's voice, a small child with the power of life and death at his fingertips. I don't want to die, he said, and then there was silence. Everything stopped. Inside my body, every cell deflated, wilting cells like dead petals falling from a flower, jasmine flowers floating to the ground. Can I smell jasmine somewhere? Yes, sweet jasmine on the window sill, perhaps. Theo stepped away from Gabriel and started talking to me. I found it hard to focus on his words. You see, Alicia, I knew Gabriel was a coward, fucking my wife behind my back. He destroyed the only happiness I ever had. Theo leaned forward, right in my face. I'm sorry to do this, but quite frankly, now you know the truth. You're better off dead. He raised the gun and pointed it at my head. I shut my eyes. I heard Gabriel screaming, Don't shoot, don't shoot, don't! A click, and then a gunshot, so loud that it blew away all other sound. There was silence for a few seconds. I thought I was dead, but I wasn't so lucky. I opened my eyes. Theo was still there, pointing the gun at the ceiling. He smiled. He put his fingers to his lips, telling me to keep quiet. Alicia? Gabriel shouted. Alicia? I could hear Gabriel writhing in his chair, trying to turn around to see what had happened. What did you do to her, you bastard? You fucking bastard! Oh, Jesus. Theo untied my wrist. He dropped the gun to the floor. Then he kissed me ever so gently on the cheek. He walked out and the front door slammed up after him. Gabriel and I were alone. He was sobbing, crying, barely able to form words. He just kept calling my name, wailing, Alicia, Alicia. I remained silent. Alicia? Fuck. Oh, fuck. I remained silent. Alicia, answer me. Alicia. Oh, God. I remained silent. How could I talk? Gabriel had saddened me to death. The dead don't talk. I untied the wire around my ankles. I got up from the chair. I reached down to the floor. My fingers closed around the gun. It was hot and heavy in my hand. I walked around the chair and I faced Gabriel. Tears were streaming down his cheeks. His eyes widened. Alicia? You're alive. Thank God you're... I wish I could say I struck a blow for the defeated, that I was standing up for the betrayed and brokenhearted, that Gabriel had a giant's eye, my father's eyes, but I'm past lying now. The truth is, Gabriel had my eyes, suddenly, and I had his. Somewhere along the line, we had swapped places. I saw it now. I would never be safe, never be loved. All my hopes dashed, all my dreams shattered, leaving nothing. My father was right. I didn't deserve to live. I was nothing. That's what Gabriel did to me. That's the truth. I didn't kill Gabriel. He killed me. All I did was pull the trigger. Chapter 2. There is nothing so pitiful, Indira said, as seeing all someone's possessions in a cardboard box. I nodded. I looked around the room sadly. Surprising, really, Indira went on, how few things Alicia had, when you think how much junk the other patients accumulate. All she had were some books, a few drawings, her clothes. Indira and I were clearing out Alicia's room on Stephanie's instructions. It's unlikely she'll ever wake up, Stephanie has said, and quite frankly, we need the bed. We worked in silence, mostly, deciding what to put in storage and what to throw away. I carefully looked through her belongings. I wanted to make sure there was nothing incriminating, nothing that might trip me up. I wonder how Alicia had managed to keep her diary hidden and out of sight for so long. Each patient was allowed to bring a small amount of personal items with them upon admittance to the grove. Alicia had brought a portfolio of sketches, which I presume was how she smuggled in the diary. I opened the portfolio and flicked through the drawings. They were mostly unfinished pencil sketches and studies, a few casual lines thrown onto a page, immediately coming to life, brilliantly evocative, capturing an unmistakable likeness. I showed the sketch to Dura. It's you. What? It's not. It is. Is it? Dara looked delighted and studied closely. Do you think so? I never noticed her drawing me. I wonder when she did it. It's good, isn't it? Yes, it is. You should keep it. And Dara pulled a face and handed it back. I couldn't do that. Of course you can. She wouldn't mind. I smiled. No one will ever know. I suppose not. She glanced at the painting upright on the floor, leaning against the wall. The painting of me and Alicia on the fire escape of the burning building, which had been defaced by Elif. What about that? Dara asked me. Will you take it? I shook my head. I'll call Chief Felix. He can take charge of it. Dara nodded. It's a shame you can't keep it. I looked at it for a moment. I didn't like it. Of all of Alicia's painting, it was the only one I didn't like. Strange, considering it had me as its subject. I want to be clear. I never thought Alicia would shoot Gabriel. This is an important point. I never intended nor expected her to kill him. All I wanted was to awaken Alicia to the truth about her marriage, as I had been awakened. I intended to show her that Gabriel didn't love her, that her life was a lie, their marriage a sham. Only then would she have a chance, as I had, to build a new life from the rubble, a life based on truth, not lies. I had no idea about Alicia's history of instability. Had I known, I never would have pushed things so far. I had no idea she would react like that, and when the story was all over the press and Alicia was on trial for murder, I felt a deep sense of personal responsibility and the desire to expiate my guilt and prove that I was not responsible for what had happened. So I applied for the job at the Grove. I wanted to help her through the aftermath of the murder, help her understand what had happened, work through it and be free. If you were cynical, you might say I revisited the scene of the crime, so to speak, to cover my tracks. That's not true. Even though I knew the risk of such an endeavor, the real possibility that I might get caught, that it might end in disaster, I had no choice because of who I am. I am a psychotherapist, remember? Alicia needed help and only I knew how to help her. I was nervous she might know me despite my having worn the mask and disguised my voice. But Alicia didn't seem to recognize me, and I was able to play a new part in her life. Then, that night in Cambridge, I finally understood what I had unwillingly reenacted, the long-forgotten landmine on which I had trundled. Gabriel was the second man to condemn Alicia to death. Bringing up this original trauma was more than she could bear, which is why she picked up the gun and visited her long-awaited revenge, not upon her father but upon her husband. As I suspected, the murder had much older, deeper origins than my actions, but when she lied to me about how Gabriel died, it was obvious Alicia had recognized me and she was testing me. I was forced to take action, to silence Alicia forever. I had Christian take the blame, a poetic justice, I felt. I had no qualms about framing him. Christian had failed Alicia when she needed him the most. He deserved to be punished. Silencing Alicia wasn't so easy. Injecting her with morphine was the hardest thing I ever done. Then she didn't die, but is asleep. It's better. This way I can still visit her every day and sit by her bed and hold her hand. I haven't lost her. Are we done? Asked Indira, interrupting my thoughts. I think so. Good, I have to go. I have a patient at 12. Go ahead, I said. See you at lunch? Yes. Indira gave my arm a squeeze and left. I looked at my watch. I thought about leaving early, going home. I felt exhausted. I was about to turn off the light and leave when a thought occurred to me, and I felt my body stiffen. The diary. Where was it? My eyes flickered across the room, neatly packed and boxed up. But gone through it all, I had looked at and considered each and every one of her personal items, and it wasn't there. How could I have been so careless? Indira and her fucking endless and chatter had distracted me and made me lose focus. Where was it? It has to be here. Without the diary, there was precious little evidence to convict Christian. I had to find it. I searched the room, feeling increasingly frantic. I turned the cardboard boxes upside down, scattering the contents on the floor. I rummaged through the debris, but it wasn't there. I tore apart her clothing, but found nothing. I ripped open the art portfolio, shaking the sketches to the floor, but the diary wasn't among them. Then I went through the cupboards and pulled out all the drawers, checking that they were empty, then hurling them aside, but it wasn't there. Chapter 3. Julian McCone from the trust was waiting for me in reception. He had a big built, curly ginger hair and a fondness for phrases such as between you and me, or at the end of the day, or the bottom line, which frequently popped up in his conversation, often in the same sentence. He was essentially a benign figure, the friendly face of the trust. He wanted to have a word with me before I went home. I've just come from Professor Diomedes. I thought you should know. He's resigned. I see. He took early retirement. Between you and me, it was either that or face and encouraged into this mess. Julian shrugged. I can't help but feel sorry for him. Not a particularly glorious end to a long and distinguished career, but at least this way he'll be spared the press and all the hoo-ha. Incidentally, he mentioned you. Diomedes? Yes, he suggested we give you his job and Christian's arrest. There's simply no question of keeping the grove open. We're closing it down permanently. I can't say I'm surprised. So in fact, there's no job to be had? Well, the bottom line is this. We're planning to open a new, much more cost-efficient psychiatric service here in the next few months, and we'd like you to consider running it, Theo. It was hard to conceal my excitement. I agree with pleasure. Between you and me, I said, borrowing one of his phrases, is the kind of opportunity that I dream about. And it was a chance to actually help people, not just medicate them. Help them the way I believe they should be helped, the way Ruth helped me, the way I tried to help Alicia. Things have worked out well for me. I'll be ungrateful not to acknowledge that. It seems I got to everything I wanted. Well, almost. Last year, Kathy and I moved out of central London to Surrey, back to where I grew up. After my father died, he left me the house. Although it remained my mother's to live in until she died, she decided to give it to us, and she moved into a care facility. Kathy and I thought the extra space and garden would be worth the commute into London. I thought it would be good for us. We promised ourselves we would transform the house and made plans to redecorate and exercise. But nearly a year since we moved in, the place remains unfinished, half decorated. The pictures and convicts mirror we brought in Portobello Market still propped up against unpainted walls. It remains very much the house I grew up in, but I don't mind the way I thought I would. In fact, I felt quite at home, which is ironic. I arrived at the house and let myself in. I quickly took off my coat. It was sweltering, like a greenhouse. I turned down the thermostat in the hallway. Kathy loves being hot, while I much prefer being cold, so temperature is one of our little battlegrounds. I could hear the TV from the hallway. Kathy seemed to watch a lot of TV these days, a never-ending soundtrack of garbage that underscores our life in this house. I found her in the living room, curled up on the sofa. She had a giant bag of prawn cocktail crisps on her lap and was fishing them out with sticky red fingers and shoveling them into her mouth. She's always eating crap like that. It's not surprising she gained weight recently. She hasn't been working much in the past couple of years, and she's become quite withdrawn, depressed even. Her doctor wanted to put her on antidepressant, but I discouraged it. Instead, I advocated her getting a therapist and talking through her feelings. I even offered to find her a shrink myself, but Kathy doesn't want to talk, it seems. Sometimes I catch her looking at me strangely and wonder what she's thinking. Is she trying to summon up the courage to tell me about Gabriel and the affair? But she doesn't say a word. She just sits in silence, the way Alicia used to. I wish I could help her, but I can't seem to reach her. That's the terrible irony. I did all this to keep Kathy, and I've lost her anyway. I perched on the armrest and watched her for a moment. A patient of mine took an overdose. She's in a coma. No reaction. It looks as though another member of the staff may have administered the overdose deliberately. A colleague, no reaction. Are you listening to me? Kathy gave me a brief shrug. I don't know what to say. Some sympathy might be nice. For who? For you? For her. I've been seeing her for a while in individual therapy. Her name is Alicia Berenson. I glanced at her, Kathy as I said this. She didn't react, not even a flicker of emotion. She's famous, or infamous. Everyone was talking about her a few years ago. She killed her husband, remember? No, not really. Kathy shrugged and changed the channel. So we continue our game of let's pretend. I seem to do a lot of pretending these days, for a lot of people, including myself, which is why I'm writing this, I suppose. An attempt to bypass my monstrous ego and access the truth about myself, if that's possible. I needed a drink. I went into the kitchen and poured myself a shot of vodka with the freezer. It burned my throat as I swallowed it. I poured another. I wonder what Ruth would say if I went to find her again, as I did 6 years ago, and confess all this to her. But I knew it was impossible, that I was altogether a different creature now, a guiltier thing, less capable of honesty. How could I sit opposite that frail old lady and look into those watery blue eyes that held me safe for so long, and gave me nothing but decency, kindness, truth, and reveal how foul I am? How cruel, how vengeful and perverse, how unworthy I am of Ruth and everything she tried to do for me? How could I tell her that I have destroyed 3 lives, that I have no moral code, that I'm capable of the worst kind of acts without remorse, and my only concern is for my own skin? Even worse than the shock or repulsion, or possibly even fear, in Ruth's eyes as I told her this would be the look of sadness, disappointment, and self-reproach. Because not only had I let her down, I know she would be thinking she had let me down, and not just me, but the talking cur itself. for no therapist ever had a better shot at it than Ruth. She had years to work with someone who was damaged, yes, but so young, just a boy and so willing to change, to get better, to heal. Yet, despite hundreds of hours of psychotherapy, talking and listening and analyzing, she was unable to save his soul. Perhaps I was wrong. Perhaps some of us are simply born evil, and despite our best efforts, we remain that way. The doorbell rang, rousing me from my thoughts. It wasn't a common occurrence, an evening visitor, not since we moved to Surrey. I couldn't even remember the last time we'd had friends over. "Are you expecting someone?" I called out, but there was no reply. Kathy probably couldn't hear me over the TV. I went to the front door and opened it. To my surprise, it was Chief Inspector Allen. He was wrapped up in a scarf and coat, and his cheeks were flushed. "Good evening, Mr. Faber." "Inspector Allen? What are you doing here?" "I happened to be in the neighborhood and thought I'll pop in. A couple of developments I wanted to tell you about. Is now convenient?" I hesitated. "To be honest, I'm just about to cook dinner, so this won't take long." Alan smiled. He clearly wasn't going to take no for an answer, so I stepped aside and let him enter. He looked happy to be inside. He pulled off his gloves and his coat. "It's getting bloody cold out there. Cold enough to snow, I bet." His glasses had steamed up and he took them off and wiped them with his handkerchief. "I'm afraid it's rather warm in here," I said. "Not for me. Can't be too warm for my liking." "You'll get on with my wife." Right on cue, Kathy appeared in the hallway. She looked from me to the inspector quizzically. "What's going on?" "Kathy, this is Chief Inspector Allen. He's in charge of the investigation about the patient I mentioned." "Good evening, Miss Faber. Inspector Allen wants to talk to me about something. We won't be long. Go upstairs and have your bath, and I'll call you when dinner's ready." I nodded at the inspector to go into the kitchen. "After you." Inspector Allen glanced at Kathy again before he turned and went into the kitchen. I followed, leaving Kathy lingering in the hallway before I heard her footsteps slowly going upstairs. "Can I get you something to drink?" "Thank you. That's very kind. A cup of tea would be lovely." I saw his eyes go to the bottle of vodka on the counter. I smiled. "Or something stronger if you prefer?" "No, thank you. A cup of tea suits me just fine." "How do you take it?" "Strong, please. Just enough milk to color it. No sugar. I'm trying to give it up." As he spoke, my mind drifted, wondering what he was doing here and if I should be nervous. His manner was so gentle, it was hard not to feel safe. Besides, there was nothing that could trip me up, was there? I switched on the kettle and turned to face him. "So, Inspector, what was it you wanted to talk to me about?" "Well, about Mr. Martin, mainly." "Jean Felix? Really? That surprised me. What about him?" "Well, he came to the Grove to collect Alicia's art materials, and we got talking about one thing and another. Interesting man, Mr. Martin. He's planning a retrospective of Alicia's work. He seems to think now is a good time to re-evaluate her as an artist, given all the publicity. I dare say he's right." Ellen gave me an appraising look. "You might want to write about her, sir. I'm sure there'll be interest in a book or something like that." I hadn't considered it. "What exactly has Jean Felix retrospective got to do with me, Inspector?" "Well, Mr. Martin was particularly excited to see the new painting. He didn't seem concerned that you left defaced it. He said it added a special quality to it. I can't remember the exact words he used. I don't know much about art myself. Do you?" "Not really." I wondered how long it was going to take the inspector to get to the point, and why I was feeling increasingly uneasy. Anyway, Mr. Martin was admiring the picture, and he picked it up to look at it more closely, and there it was. What was? This. The inspector pulled out something from inside his jacket. I recognized it at once. The diary. The kettle boiled, and a shriek filled the air. I switched it off and poured some boiling water into the mug. I stirred it and noticed my hand was trembling slightly. "Oh, good. I wonder where it was." "Wedged in the back of the painting, in the top left corner of the frame. It was jammed in tight." So that's where she hid it, I thought. The back of the painting that I hated, the one place I didn't look. The inspector stroked the creased, faded black cover and smiled. He opened it and looked through the pages. Fascinating. The arrows, the confusion. I nodded. "A portrait of a disturbed mind." Inspector Allen flicked through the pages to the end. He started reading from it aloud. He was scared of the sound of my voice. He grabbed my wrist and struck a needle in my vein. I felt a sudden rising panic. I didn't know those words. I hadn't read that entry. It was the incriminating evidence I had been looking for, and it was in the wrong hands. I wanted to snatch the diary from Alan and tear out the pages, but I couldn't move. I was trapped. I started stammering. I really think it's better if I spoke too nervously, and he heard the fear in my voice. Yes? Nothing. I made no further attempt to stop him. Any action I took would be viewed as incriminating anyway. There was no way out, and the strangest thing is I felt relieved. You know, I don't believe you happen to be in my neighborhood at all, Inspector. I'd handed him his tea. No, you're quite right. I thought it best not to announce the intention of my visit on the doorstep. But the fact is, this put things in rather a different light. I'm curious to hear it, I heard myself saying. Will you read it out loud? Very well. I felt strangely calm as I sat in the chair by the window. He cleared his throat and began. Theo just left. I am alone. I'm writing this as fast as I can. As I listened, I looked up at the white clouds drifting past. Finally, they had opened. It had started to snow. Snowflakes were falling outside. I opened the window and reached out my hand. I caught a snowflake. I watched it disappear, vanish from my fingertip. I smiled, and I went to catch another one.